welcome back to the Boropolis podcast. As usual, I am joined with Nathan, and on this week's episode of the podcast, well, we're back down to earth, aren't we? Feet firmly placed back on the ground. 2 defeats for Boro this week. First of all, that night under the lights against Leeds. Boro tried, but ultimately lost out on the night. And then, as we said last week on the podcast, it was going to be a real test of character. You know, going to the den, going into the lion's den, if you'll pardon the pun. And, well, typical Boro come out, didn't they? They just didn't really turn up. And ultimately now, after the highest of highs last week, find themselves outside of the playoff places and nervously awaiting Coventry potentially ending any realistic hopes of getting into the top 6 this season, Nathan. I would ask how your week's been. I hope if we just disregard the football for a moment, it's been a week of good news. And I mean, the sun's been out a little bit, so that's always nice. But yeah, Nathan, it's hard. You can probably tell in my voice already. It's hard to have a smile on your face when, yeah, Boro just beat Boro.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's the word of the season cropping up once again, isn't it? Which is frustration at a mini run of games in which we've played some opposition in which you'd expect us to receive favourable results with the players that we've got. The players delivered in those games. There's no doubt about that. We've won a lot of games recently, but at the start of this week, we discussed that Leeds United and Millwall were going to be difficult tests that we haven't had in the last couple of weeks leading up to this week. And it'd be interesting to see if Boro could stand up to the challenge and pick up a positive result or two. And in the end, they've come out, well, the wrong end of the result in both games. One looks like a narrow one against Leeds. It wasn't really, was it? They scored 3 perfectly good goals on the night. Only one of them was given, and yeah, Borough, as you sort of saw on social media and heard from different pundits and what have you, that they huffed and puffed, which in the second half they did to an extent. They had a lot of half chances, openings down the right hand side, especially with Bergzorg, but struggled really to create anything of note and forced Darlow into really good saves. And then obviously yesterday afternoon, going to Millwall, they had a really good result in midweek, and Borough going down there. I'm going to be honest, I didn't expect a lot. Didn't expect them to be able to stand up to the challenge. I've seen it all before with this group of players this season that if a side wants it, this side will happily just sort of not necessarily throw in the towel, but just put their hands up and say, yeah, all right, okay. And look, yesterday afternoon, Millwall wanted it more, created the better chances, and got the just rewards because Borough players seemingly don't want to defend and track runners. So yeah, it's a sort of a sad indictment of where this group of players is at the moment and has been the last couple of years. There have been obviously a general theme of Carrick's tenure, which is he's lost his best players, he's had injuries, but the sad indictment is that this group of players under him are nearly men, and that
Yeah,
they've never been good enough to achieve the goals that are set out for them at the start of the season, and the ones that they set out themselves when they come out in interviews at the start of the season say playoffs is the goal, playoffs is the goal, playoffs is the goal, and they leave themselves a little bit short with a couple of games left in the season once again. So yeah, a real sort of shame, but I just don't think that we're good enough and haven't done for the last couple of weeks. We spoke about last week that just as they're about to lose you, as they lost 6 games out of 7 throughout January and February and leading on into March. They pull you back in with a couple of results. And then just as you pull back on board, they just come over the top and hit you with a big right hand and just sink you back into the ground.
Yeah, they're very, very good at that, to be honest, aren't they? And yeah, like you say, I guess obviously, we'll get into sort of the more specifics of each performance. But I guess if you look at the game on Tuesday night, I don't mind as much losing games like that. You're playing against a really, really good opposition. We spoke about them having a little bit of a blip. But, I mean, during said blip, yes, they'd drawn a lot of games, but they hadn't lost. And they've still got really, really top quality in terms of a championship squad. So I don't think any Middlesbrough fan, even despite the previous results, was going into the game thinking, you know what? They probably thought, yeah, we'll give them a good game. But I don't think any Middlesbrough fan was really going into that game expecting us to sort of turn them over or was really confident that we beat them in any sort of fashion. But it goes back to a few different podcasts this season, to be honest. I think there's ways of losing games. And like you said, Middlesbrough were relatively fortunate, to be honest, because Leeds score 3 perfect goals and actually only win the game 1-0. So on another night, you look at that 3-0 scoreline and you think, God, that's really, really, before even yesterday's result against Millwall, you've been put back down to earth. And then yesterday is totally different, I guess, because it's been a theme all season, and we'll get onto it, obviously, in terms of the actual performance, but very much, again, not even so much like a real technical or tactical reason for losing the game. It's just the difference of one manager being proactive and one group of players grabbing the game by the scruff of the neck and basically just going, and I hate using this as an excuse because it sounds like a cheap excuse, but basically out fighting Middlesbrough. And we'll get onto it, as I say. I mean, because they were, in a sense, polar opposites in terms of performance, but yet again, it just feels like however many other games that I could probably reel off now, that carrying passengers has been a theme throughout the season. And when, we really thought, okay, you've done this numerous times this season. And in fairness, you've got yourself back into a position where you've give yourself something with 5-6 games left, something really quite big to fight for. And then you turn in a performance like that. And this isn't just on the players. We'll get on to Carrick as well. But I guess on the topic of not being able to carry passengers, probably best to start on Leeds and the fact that Kelechi Iheanacho sort of waltzed round the pitch, embarrassing himself, to be honest, on Tuesday night. I mean, look, the first goal and the winning goal ultimately wasn't his fault, but I think going into the Leeds game, we both said last week, you can't have an off day. Leeds have got to have somewhat of an off day, and we've got to play extremely well. And all 11 players have got to be right at it, concentration-wise, fitness-wise, pressing-wise, and really stand up to the occasion, stand up to the atmosphere. And, I mean, Iheanacho got the brunt of it. I'll throw Finn Azaz in there again because, yet again, against the top side, you might as well have played without him. The first goal, in fairness, it's not either of those two that are at fault, but I mean, the real basics of football, playing against a team like Leeds with an away following as good as that, you just think, try your best to keep it tight for the first 10. And I mean, after, what was it, a minute and 22 minutes, you've got an absolute mountain to climb.
Yeah, and it actually sort of came down to early on in the game, and I mean, quite disgustingly, it continued for the rest of the first half, which was Boro's right-hand side couldn't get to grips with what Leeds were doing on their left. Obviously, setting up in a 4-2-3-1 for Leeds with Gruev and Tanaka in midfield, Fairport left back, and Ampadu and Rodon at centre half. So in their setup and their build up, Gruev would drop and play almost as a left back. Firpo would pick up positions as an inverted fullback, and Solomon would be very high and wide. So Bergzorg and Iheanacho playing in this system which has Iheanacho slightly withdrawn off Conway, in which it's just not his position. It's not been working for his time at the football club, really, and it hasn't worked all season. They tried it with Conway playing there at the start of the season with Latelath up front. It didn't work, and we sort of moved away from it. Had Azaz playing there, and obviously it worked a little bit better because Azaz is a 10 by trade, and yeah, so Berg's and Iheanacho didn't have a clue what to do in terms of, was it Iheanacho's job to press Gruev when he had the ball, or was it Bergzorg's? Now, Firpo is then free in the middle of the pitch early on. Ball gets played into him. He's free as a bird, and he's able to turn, play a ball down the side of Anthony Dijksteel, and one cross across the face of goal from Solomon, and Dan James with his pace in behind Ilin Jr. The ball's fantastic from Solomon. It takes Ilin Jr. out of the game, really. There's not a whole lot that he can do to defend it, and it sort of ends up in the back of the net a little bit fortuitously with it bouncing off James, not a clean contact. It might even come off Travers and sort of leap up onto the bar and into the back of the net. But it continued this for the first half in terms of Bergzorg and Iheanacho didn't know what to do in terms of who to press. In the end, Morris would come over and did help out and help mop up at times in terms of picking up either Firpo or whether Tanaka came over and there was possible rotations between the Leeds forwards. But there was plenty of opportunities for Leeds in that first half to get at us down our right hand side, which they didn't exploit really, but it looked incredibly difficult for our players in that first half, especially. But Carrick stood there in his box. Where's the instruction to, okay, Iheanacho presses Gruev, Bergzorg drops in and either covers Firpo or just comes in and helps Dijksteel with Solomon. But there was just nothing for the first half. Come out for the second half, and all of a sudden, Bergzorg's no longer pressing. So how come that instruction wasn't relayed in the first half? Just spent 45 minutes chasing shadows for no reason when it was blatantly obvious to see what was going on. Like, this is coming from someone that doesn't have a clue what they're talking about. But
I think you've got a clue. Don't undersell yourself, Nathan.
so yeah, it was incredibly frustrating to watch. Obviously, we had maybe one chance that was
I think
worthy,
the
worthy
first.
of talking about. Yeah, in the first half
I
with
was just gonna say, sorry. The first half for me was just summed up where Ilin Jr. bursts down the left. I think it's Hackney which releases him. It might have been Azaz, cuts one back, and to be fair, Iheanacho picks up a really lovely position, unmarked. He's got acres really to take a touch on his left foot, on his strong foot. Tries to hit it first time, and I think it lands on the boat outside of the riverside. There's certain performances where you can say, I think they're teetering on the edge of being hooked at half time. And I'm not going to lie, I wouldn't have been surprised. And I think it probably would have been fair enough if Iheanacho hadn't come out for the second half. Never did I think that would be the case, but I mean, I'm sure all of you watched the game that are watching and listening, but yeah, it was. And I mean, Carrick's comments after, I get why he said that. He's not going to come out and say, well, he was dreadful. No wonder he's got low confidence. He's playing rubbish at the moment, because that's not what Carrick's about, and it's not what a good manager would do. But I don't know. I just sometimes think he digs himself a hole a little bit in his defense of, like, what's the big deal?
Yeah,
at least front up a little bit. You know, people are not stupid.
yeah. Obviously, he sort of has to do that, but there has been points this season where, like after the West Brom game in January, we'd lost a couple of games prior to that. It's like, yeah, what's the big deal? I don't get what the big deal is, and then went on to lose the next three or four following that. Just might be best just to deflect rather than
Yeah.
sort of play it the way he does at times. But yeah, Iheanacho was really poor. Granted, picking up positions where he could receive the ball, but upon receiving the ball's rolling under his foot as he's trying to control it with the sole of his foot. It's just poor, like really poor, basic stuff. And yeah, obviously hooked into the second half, and Whittaker replaced him, who, okay, didn't do a lot, really. Yeah, going into the second half, should have been two or three down, really. Obviously, after the Tanaka offside in the first half, Boro had a couple of opportunities in the second half, as you say, huffed and puffed in terms of creating a couple of half chances, really. A couple of times we turned them with Bergzorg running down the right hand side, and a couple of instances where crosses, one found Azaz, blazed that one over the bar, one found Bergzorg, shanked it wide. If you're not going to hit the target, I'm not necessarily going to count them as massive chances for us, because you're not hitting the target, you're not making the keeper make a save. It's not good enough to be able to not hit the target from 10 yards out. It's really poor. And obviously, in the end, Leeds had to dig in with the goals not being given to them. Bamford came on, scored a perfectly good goal, went to go and whip his shirt off, made it look like a prat. And yeah, they ran the clock like they needed to in the end. And yeah, they got themselves a massive 3 points. It is what it is. I'm not necessarily surprised that we got beat against Leeds United at home, but you're hoping for a reaction going into Millwall. And yeah, are you surprised at the result, Chris? Are you
Uh,
surprised that
look,
this crop of players rolled over?
I'm not surprised, but I said this to you yesterday. I'm not surprised. Did I expect it? Ultimately, again, story of Boro's season, story of Michael Carrick's Middlesbrough, apart from a spell in his first season. Nearly men, and like you said at the top end of the podcast, if you rough them up, if you really get in their faces, there's a few of them that'll give it a right go and will stand up to the challenge. But for the most part, they'll roll over and they'll be victims to a little bit of a hostile atmosphere or a little bit of a difficult spell in a game. And yesterday was exactly that. One positive, Iheanacho didn't start, so you didn't have to see him. I was about to say run around, but I think that would be generous, to be honest. Morgan Whittaker come into the team and, I mean, quite amazingly, did even less than what Iheanacho's been doing. A few neat touches here and there, but for the most part, very similar to Finn Azaz. You might as well have played without him. Misses a great chance, actually, at 0-0. I think what annoys me most about the pair of them, especially, they've obviously got lots of talent. That's undeniable. You know, you don't have bids from Lazio coming in for your last season if you don't have talent. Same goes with Finn Azaz. You don't get 10 goals and 11 assists or whatever it is. But in terms of when the going gets tough, I don't think there's two players, judging from what I've seen of Whittaker, and look, Plymouth fans have said the same, but from what I've seen so far, I don't think there's two players in the division I'd want less in my team, to be honest. Heart's the size of a pea. Going into 50-50s, well, probably 60-40s in their favour, dangling a toe in, not really wanting to get hurt, not really wanting to go that extra little bit to try and get this Middlesbrough team to do something that they haven't been able to do this season, and that's kind of go against the grain, go against all of the taglines that they've been given this season. They've just re-emphasised all of the phrases that have been used. Lack of character, carrying passengers, two of them probably the biggest ones. Yeah, I mean, the list's endless. And look, don't get me wrong, I actually didn't think the first half performance yesterday was that bad, to be honest. As I say, Middlesbrough probably have best chance of the first half. Whittaker should do better. Millwall went close-ish, I think, after probably a minute or so, to be honest. I thought it was going to be the same story as Leeds. Swung a free kick into the box, and Travers is a little bit sort of glued to his line. And yeah, in the first half, look, Millwall had a couple of times where we did spin them round, and that sort of forward dynamic, there wasn't a whole load of positives, but it did mean that Illing Jr. got loads of space on the left, and he had the beating of George Honeyman and Leonard, the Millwall right back, almost every time. And Hayden Hackney, Morris, both, every time they got the ball, tried to play forward. And, you know, I was content going in at half time. And then this is where it changes. Put a post out yesterday on my own account, the epitome of Michael Carrick's Middlesbrough team. Half time comes, Millwall and Alex Neil make a change. And I think that's literally bang on half time. Then after 58 minutes, the tide of the game is starting to swing with a little bit of momentum towards Millwall. They have a penalty shout, which actually, I think, in fairness, the referee gets right. Although at first glance, I was adamant that he made a howler where Langstaff goes down under some pressure from Illing Jr. But yeah, it hits the 58th minute, and Alex Neil makes a triple substitution. And when the tide of the game is starting to go, and it was in the balance a little bit, he goes and wins the game for his team. And Michael Carrick, like usual, stands on the sideline, sort of scrubbing his chin, wondering what to do, wondering when I should really make these changes. And the most frustrating thing is, literally, kind of as the attack breaks down or the ball's lost from Middlesbrough's perspective, you see McGree and Force taking the bibs off to come on from the resulting attack. Millwall then take the lead. And it's a substitute that puts the ball in the back of the goal. Now, yes, could have been anyone that the ball falls to in the Millwall box. Yet again, Middlesbrough defend their box in a really dreadful manner. Rav van den Berg, I've spoke very, very highly of him over the time of doing this podcast since he's been at the club. This season in particular, he has... Look, you don't become a bad player overnight. I'm not saying that, but he's kind of failed to live up to the expectations that he really showed last season with the awards that he won. And yeah, instead of getting a head on it or just a boot on it and being a bit more like Johnny Howson is, look, sometimes being a defender, it's got to be ugly. You've just got to leather it and kind of put it out for a throw in, put it out for wherever, or just give them the ball back. He kind of half gets a knee on it, and then it ricochets out to Negley. Rav van den Berg's not the main one at fault here. It's not great in terms of a defending his box point of view. Aidan Morris and Hayden Hackney really, and despite the fact that, in fairness, I don't want to really haul loads of blame at them too, because they were two of Boro's better players on the day. He's just got a free run from, well, as soon as the ball breaks down, and I think it's taken off Hackney pretty much bang on the centre circle, just unmarked, and he kind of strolls into the box, and then it falls to him, sticks it in the back of the net, and yet Aidan Morris and Hayden Hackney are sort of looking around as if to say, well, is someone going to pick him up? He's just ran off the pair of us. It's a crap goal to concede. It really is.
It's another goal where it goes in. You look at the reactions, and every man and the dog's throwing their hands up and saying, "Yeah, we'll lose Manzi." Yeah, it's as I say at the start of the podcast. as good as those two midfielders are, it's just unforgivable that this stuff can happen. And yeah, at the end of the day, despite Millwall having all of the better chances in the game, really, that if you track your man, it's a 0-0 draw, you come away with a point. It's not the worst result in the world if you come away with that. You keep them at arm's length, and it's another point on the board at the end of play. Bristol City, you don't lose out any more ground than you already have to them. And obviously, with Coventry playing Monday, you sort of give yourself a little bit of a chance to still be in touch of where they are. And instead, you've lost ground and you've invited Millwall back in now.
Yeah,
The fact that we are, and it's no disrespect to Millwall, it's disrespect to our football club. The fact that aside with the budget that they have is anywhere near where we are, and the fact that now they've got our striker on loan and they're on the same points as us. It's it's disgusting, really, to see where we are in regard to other sides in this league with the resources that we have. Sold our best players for millions and millions and millions of pounds. And I was scrolling through TikTok yesterday and came across a clip that said Middlesbrough side from November to now is like light and day in terms of the amount of change that you've had. You can't go through a season with this amount of churn constantly. And we're going to have it again in the summer. There's no doubt we're going to have it again in the summer. I'd rather just have a level of stability in this. You have to, yeah, I gather you have to churn for a certain amount of time to be able to build funds to be able to supplement the model. But there has to be a point where, in the not too distant future, because this has gone on for 2 seasons now, this model, we're into the third season of this, where we've lost our best players within, well, 6 months in Rodgers' case of him coming in the building. Bang, 6 months, you were decent, off you pop, scored in the quarterfinal of the Champions League this week. Lath was here a year, bang, churned, sold, replaced with a loan player in
I
a
think
short-term move.
I think
Chris,
in
the churn, it has to stop at some point,
yeah,
and the summer we're likely to see another rebuild again. And I'm hoping that they get more right than wrong. They have to get more right than wrong because we can't afford to be punting on Silvera and Micah Hamiltons of the world, because the likelihood is Sammy Silvera is going to be hoyed straight back on the first flight to Australia in the summer, and it's been an absolute waste of everyone's time at this moment. But we cannot continue to churn our best players out the building.
yeah. Look, I understand exactly what you're saying, and in terms of that, I completely agree with the churning of the squad. And I think at some point last season, or towards the back end of last season, Carrick said that it almost feels like there's been sort of like three variations of this team. And obviously, first variation would have been Morgan Rogers playing up top, and kind of that variation. Darrell Lenihan was still kicking about. Then it went through the phase of basically having no players whatsoever, and it was kind of like the bare 11 with academy players. And then towards the back end of last season, we obviously had added Aylin. He won his contract, getting all those assists. Laugh coming into form, and that was the third variation. This season, there probably hasn't been three variations, but as you say, from the beginning, first half of the season, okay, and yes, there's a transfer window in the middle, so there's going to be change. But it's felt so different in the second half of the season. And I think what perhaps, I guess you could say it's a good thing, or I'm not sure it should have been acted on as such in January, is I think for me, looking at it now in terms of some of the decisions that were made, it seems like in January, there was almost a bit of a realization, whether it be from the recruitment team or the management staff or both, where they've gone, right, we're a year and a half or whatever it is down the line with this cycle. It hasn't worked at all. And we're now left with a load of dead wood that almost before we'd even brought in replacements for Latilaf and before he'd even gone, it kind of at one stage felt in January that almost one squad player a day was leaving. It was Clark, McGree was rumoured to go, Force was rumoured to go. Yes, okay, yeah, they're both still here. But Hamilton went. It was like almost a collective, actually, this squad isn't very good and we need to be ruthless and get rid of people here. Luke Ayling, injured, okay, not good enough. The left backs, Engel went. And it's not so much the big, like, attacking players that I want to say is my main concern, because ultimately, both me and you were advocates of saying it's part of the model, and it's easy to get stuck into this is the model, we sell our best players. Eventually, like you say, you've got to keep those players. But it's like, understandably, if you get offered nearly 30 million for Latilaf, for a club in our financial situation, in our standings within the EFL, it's a no-brainer. The same could have been said about Rodgers. It's more so the sort of smaller components of that. The people that, yes, you've got to have a squad, but you don't want an interchangeable squad where another one, for example, Anthony Dijksteel. Yes, he's out of contract at the end of the season. Do I think you'll get another contract? I'm not entirely sure. I'd probably lean on no, to be honest, because I think you'll want to go and be a guaranteed starter somewhere. And I hope he's not here next season, although I'd happily have him as an option at the very maximum. But as you say, in terms of the churn, it's, I mean, does it beg the question, from the very beginning of this season, have we overrated this squad? Are we looking at it from two standpoints, where it's unacceptable that we've spent this amount of money and are in the situation that we're in? Or is it unacceptable that actually this squad's a lot better than where the current league standing basically puts it in the division? I think it's a mix of both, to be honest, because we've gone out and spent 6.5 million on Morgan Whittaker. And yes, still relatively early days. But it just, yet again, as you say, it's going to be a huge rebuild in the summer. And it feels like we're at a stage now where we've got so many players that are just, we're a championship club. Maybe it's just us struggling to kind of accept that. But the likes of Delano Bergsorg, great. He's, a big fan favourite and he gets the crowd going. But is he really a player that's going to get you promoted?
Things like in the January window, cutting George Edmondson's loan deal short to make it a permanent. We're sat thinking, all right, be all right. We'll make him a third choice centre half. No, first choice centre half, first name on the team sheet, week in, week out, starting. Although he was horrendous from middle of December onwards, right? And cutting that loan deal short to be able to sign Ryan Giles. Okay, granted, I was an advocate for that signing. It hasn't worked out anywhere near.
It was a gamble.
It was a
hasn't
gamble.
worked out, but we can't say anything because we were the ones pining for it. To be
We
fair.
were, and it hasn't worked out, and I'm really sort of gutted it hasn't. Sammy Ealing Jr., a player who doesn't have a position really. He's been shoehorned at left back, showed some good signs, but really he's hot and cold. Mark Travers is the only player that is a success from the January window, and granted, he saved us a hell of a lot of points in the time that he's been at the football club, and I'd be absolutely delighted to sign him again. Kelechi Iheanacho, shite. Like worst signing of
He's
January
up
transfer,
there.
worst signing of the January transfer window by any team in the Championship by a million miles. He's been horrendous, really. And to be in a position where we are a club with aspirations of reaching the playoff places, right? To be a club with aspirations of reaching the playoffs, and okay, you're right about the Lath point, selling him for the figure that we received. Great money. I don't think that he's worth that money, if I'm honest. So I thought it was a great deal. Replacing him with a loan player who is unfit and that you've just plodded on with week after week after week until probably until this weekend is so poor. And the fact that he's not going to be here in 4 games' time. Giles, Illing Jr., Travers not going to be here in 4 games' time. And you were already appreciative of the fact that they aren't going to be here at the end of the season in January. You know that there's going to have to be a rebuild in January. It's unforgivable to be acting this way, but I suppose it's my own fault because I'm one of the Doyles that's paid 570 quid out my own pocket for a season ticket for next season when we've got all this churn that I am calling pathetic as a
Yeah,
fan.
yeah, me and you both. Just in terms of, look, we speak about the churn, and that's largely like a recruitment issue, I guess you could say. But in terms of what Borough have, in terms of players wise and a manager, they yet again yesterday persisted with a front three. Okay, let's call it the three behind the striker because Conway, that's fine. That's something that I am actually pleased with and would be happy going into next season as him as your number 9. But when we're talking about churn of players and manager, I think tinkering's one thing that's got to come into question again. And not just personnel. You've got Delano Bergzorg yesterday brought in as predominantly a left winger playing off the right. Finn Azaz, who is a number 10 playing off the left. And Morgan Whittaker, who's played his best football and was the target of a very big money bid from Burnley as a right winger and played his best football off the right, playing as the number 10. Why, Nathan?
Doesn't make any sense, does it?
Just why? Why overcomplicate it?
It doesn't make any sense. And the fact that it is simply being done because of the so-called link up between Azaz and Whittaker. We've seen a couple of instances, and by a couple, I mean
One.
literally two, of them two playing maybe a couple of passes, intricate passes between one another, and it resulting usually in either loss of possession or Whittaker trying to take down the boat in the tees with a missile. It hasn't been successful so far. So why are we persisting with it? Let me just be completely honest as well. Azaz is playing off the left and Whittaker's playing through the middle, right? To make them closer together. They are close together if Azaz is in the middle and Whittaker's off the right. That offers you something down that right side, which is nice to have when on the left you could have Bergzorg cutting inside and Illing Jr. playing as the overlapping left back. Look, this is why I don't get paid the big bucks, but look, there you are. That's my thoughts on it,
Yeah, look,
if I'm honest. And I think my thoughts are echoed with your thoughts as well.
no,
Play
I
these players in their natural positions and you will likely have a little bit more, I suppose, sympathy really with the attacking performance. If you play them in the natural positions and they still play shit, fair enough. What more can you do? They're playing where they naturally want to play and they're not performing. That's fine.
Yeah.
But to throw them all over the place and jumble them up, it's not great. Bergzorg and Dijksteel, okay, you might be saying that you could form a connection there, possible connection down that right side in terms of an understanding of movements or Bergzorg helping Dijksteel out. As mentioned on Tuesday night, they didn't help each other out. They got ran ragged. We conceded the goal down that side. So what?
So yeah, so why persist with it? It begs the question again, doesn't it? In terms of that forward line, I think one of the look, there's a bucket load of issues as to why Middlesbrough find themselves in the position that they're in, and in terms of people playing out of position, another one, Finazars. To be honest, the question again was brought up. I think everyone expects the type of level of performance that Iheanacho turned in on Tuesday night. But Azaz, anonymous again. And it's been picked up in terms of... I always thought it, but until I've actually seen the numbers kind of written down, it does really paint a clear picture of kind of where we're at. And I guess leads me into what I would like to see from Middlesbrough next season, potentially under a different manager. Finazars versus the current bottom half, 10 goals, 9 assists. Finazars versus the current top half. By the way, shout out to Chris underscore Borough UTB, by the way, whose post this is. If you're listening, I don't know, but there you are. Finazars versus the current top half, 0 goals and 2 assists. He doesn't want to know against good teams, does he? And there's bigger problems. I'm not like, listen, I could go at any of really the forward line and say they don't quite cut it. But in terms of when I say against Leeds, against teams like Millwall, you can't carry passengers because either they'll outfight you or better teams of better quality, they'll outplay you and they'll have rotations with the ball where passengers, people asleep, people that don't really want to know, they'll just play around you and end up making you look daft. And then it gives them a chance for better forward players to go and be devastated in the final third. Middlesbrough, when playing as a 4-2-3-1, I know we had loads of success with it. Under Aitor Karanka, we had plenty of success with a 4-2-3-1. But I look at a conversation that I listened to this week in terms of Gary Neville in the way that football's changed, like up and down the pyramid, and what is actually enjoyable to watch, what's effective. And this is, it really pains me to say this. It makes me feel physically sick, to be honest. But in terms of what not necessarily Middlesbrough are going to be, what they have the ability to do so in terms of the players that they have available to them, I'm just sick to death of watching basically the opposite of a team like Newcastle United. Newcastle United have a very functional, and it's not like dead overcomplicated and really intricate. They've got very good players, of course, in the forward line, but they're just a functional, effective team. I feel like we have 4-5 of the same players kind of basically doing a little bit of something and a little bit of nothing behind the striker. And I think we spoke about it last season where basically when you're playing in a 4-2-3-1, it becomes interchangeable to the point where no one really knows what's going on. And that was quite a big thing when we had the likes of Sam Greenwood last season and we were complaining about this. Now, Carrick's still... okay, yes, that might just be his chosen formation. It suits the way the squad's been built, and that is fundamental. Whether he goes and takes another job, he'd go to 4-2-3-1 straight away. But I'm just so jealous of teams who can just be functional, regimented, have effective players that you almost know what you're going to get. And I think age kind of comes into it a little bit. I'd love for us to, in the summer, like you say, not sign a load of, got potential, they could be great. Go and sign. I'm not saying all of our signings have to be this way, but in terms of what we lack, and especially games like this, 3 or 4 26 or 27-year-olds that are at the level right now or are going into their prime. And again, you're not probably going to be able to afford them from the championship, but just players who basically you know what you're going to get. I feel like sometimes our forward line is very much a kind of mirrored image of Michael Carrick's teams. It's like on its day, you might say it's one of the best in the division. But then when you begin to kind of look at the numbers behind it and really look at what it produces when it needs to produce, it's a bit wishy-washy and kind of, I don't know. I don't see a Middlesbrough team with the type of players that we have in the forward line currently ever getting promoted out of this division.
No, I don't either. And I think this comes back to conversations that I've had over the years. I know it's going to come across probably quite disrespectful here to clubs and also the players as well, in which I'm talking about. But players that we've signed over the last few years, Barlasser, Azaz, Whitaker, right? All things that those players have in common is they were the best player for their clubs when we took them, really. Barlasser, best player at Rotherham. Azaz, okay, you can toss up between the pair of them, but we've signed them both, so who cares? Best player at Rotherham, relegated 24th. Best player at Plymouth, stayed up by the absolute skin of the teeth last year by the fact that there was Reading, who had points deduction after points deduction. Birmingham hadn't necessarily, well, I mean, I suppose they committed professional suicide by appointing Wayne Rooney. And Plymouth did exactly the same this season. So there you go. That's where they are. You've signed the best players from three best players from two football clubs whose expectations for the level are not even to steal, but just try and steal. So when these players who look, they're all talented players, when they play, they probably stand out compared to when they're playing with the absolute cloggers in these teams. And they're probably afforded leeway at times because they can produce moments of magic in games against, I don't know, Plymouth last year when they were played against Rotherham last year. Azaz pops up with a last minute winner, and Whitaker again pops up with goals in games last year that won them points. In fairness to him, Whitaker obviously stood up last year a lot for Plymouth and pretty much single-handedly kept them in the division, but they have probably been afforded leeway at the clubs that they've been at previously. Now they've landed at a club because of the performance. Look, fair play. The performance has landed them here at a club further up the division that has not an expectation, but a hope and a goal of making the way into the playoff places. A bigger club than they've been at previously, and now they have to stand up and show not only the talent, but that hard work and graft is demanded from these players. They've just melted and withered away at times in games. The disparity in Azaz's performance from a game against Leeds United versus a game against Oxford United it's not good enough, really. And these aren't the types of characters that I want to watch week in, week out. I want to watch, and I know it's a difference, but I talked about signing difference makers at the start of the season. We signed Ben Doak, who was a kid, a literal kid from Liverpool, and to just have the confidence and self-belief in himself to be able to stand up his fullback and go, I'm just going to take you on every single time I get the ball. I'm just going to take you on. And if I get tackled, I get tackled, but I'm going to take you on again and see what you're made of. And that is what we need from players. I know it's a completely different sort of scale, but Leeds United signed characters, not just good footballers, but
I've got a
characters.
perfect example for this one, and it's a player that I've admired in this division for years. Coventry City. When we're talking about going out and improving your team and getting players that are fit, ready, raring to go, Matt Grimes. Yes, okay, they've took advantage of his contract situation, and yes, okay, slightly deeper midfielder to what we're discussing. But the type of age, the type of profile where you know exactly what you're going to get. Swansea are, yeah, okay, they're lower down the division, but they're not fighting for their life. And you're going and signing a player that starts week in, week out for a team that are still a good footballing side, but is the right age and is, well, basically durable. Like you think of Burnley, for example, who plays as a 10 for them sometimes. So Josh Brownhill, for example, like, yes, out of our price range, most likely. Premier League clubs were linked in the summer. But someone who isn't just going to give you 3 or 4 great passes a game or one moment a game, even when he's not scoring or assisting, he's a durable championship footballer. You need those types, and I just feel like sometimes we don't have enough of them, and it reflects why we get performances like we do so much under Michael Carrick, and he's partly to blame as well, because you get players that some days will produce a 8 or a 9 out of 10, but then there's not enough 7 or 6s out of 10s. You'll get an 8 out of 10, then a 4 out of 10, and that's when you start to get sporadic results and performances, because like you say, they're not durable footballers. They're people that have basically been moments players or given the freedom of a free roll because they've got 7 cloggers behind them that have basically just been given the role of defend, defend, defend. And I think sometimes it's what lets us down massively.
Yeah, it is. And it's a real shame to sort of round off where we are. I think at the start of the season, the squad that we had, looking at and thinking of the best versions of these players. Obviously, you lose like a laugh in January, but you're looking at that squad from the start of the season and thinking, yeah, Riley McGree can give us an option. Probably played 5 games all season, really, that you'd think he looked all right in. Came off the bench yesterday. Can't really tell you a touch that he had. Marcus Force, a player that, again, okay, can offer you something. Had a good effort yesterday. Just a squad player, really, for a team that is looking up at the championship table. And at the end of the day, these championship playoffs and the 2 places that we're gonna or that we're vying for isn't necessarily down to massive quality disparity between us and Coventry or us and Bristol City. I think it's coming down to your manager, really, and finding a functional system that fits the players that you've got available to play. And look, Bristol City are the prime example of this. Do I look at our squad and their squad and think that there's much of a difference? No. If anything, I'd probably say that we maybe edge it in terms of quality, but at the end of the day, they've found a way of playing. They've found a system that works. They've got a manager that's proactive, makes changes to try and turn a game in their favour, like they did against us at at Ashton Gate. Sorry, and they're reaping the rewards, aren't they? They currently find themselves in the playoffs, and it's them to lose. And look, it's not completely down and out for us in this race for the playoffs. Definitely don't think so. We've got a couple of games coming up which I think will well. I mean, look,
Let's be
we're
honest.
close.
You've got to win the next two games.
Yeah, of course you do. But
Otherwise, the season's done and
yeah,
dusted. If it's not already.
you're closing the season out. There's 4 games to go, and you have to win your games. But it's a case of it's not in our hands. We have to do our own job and win our games and see where that takes us. If we can get to the final game of the season with something to play for, great. If we don't, you can look round and we'll definitely be having a dissection of why we haven't achieved what we set out to achieve at the start of the season. We'll be having that discussion in a couple of weeks' time. But I think that we've made our opinions clear already that it's not one issue really at hand. It's a handful of issues ranging from the manager, players that don't want it, poor recruitment in terms of the January window, especially injuries once again plaguing this squad. And yeah, we all these issues at hand have all clustered together and brought us to this point in which we're not where we want to be with 3 weeks left of the season. But we've got 2 games, Chris, over next weekend. It's the time of the season. It's come at a more Easter time than last season, which was in March, which didn't really make too much sense to me. But next 2, Good Friday, Plymouth Argyle at home, Easter Monday, Sheffield Wednesday away. Plymouth Argyle, rock bottom of the Championship currently, won yesterday on the Saturday lunchtime kick-off against Sheffield United. Chris Wilder head loss. Nice to
Do you
see.
know what? That's the only reason that I've got any ounce of energy to kind of just have a half enjoyable weekend. Just seeing that little gnome get rattled and try and start a fight with almost every Plymouth player.
Yeah, it was nice to see. But yeah, Plymouth, good result for them yesterday. Gave themselves a fighting chance to stay in the division. They pulled themselves back level with Luton Town now at the bottom of the Championship.
Truthfully, is there a ground that you'd want to go to more in the Championship to potentially get a huge victory with a bigger way of following? I'm not actually sure there is, to be honest. And I'd just like us, and this is really cruel because I've got nothing against Plymouth. I'd really like us to just seal someone's fate.
Yeah, I would.
Just batter someone and take any hopes away, any chance of a big, huge scale celebration at full time at the Riverside yet again. I just want us to dash away the hopes of staying in the Championship
Yeah,
and actually just punish someone for once.
yeah, yeah. It would be nice to be ruthless for once. They look. I'm under no illusion what their game plan's going to be already, which is sit tight and be compact, deal with Middlesbrough. We haven't beat Plymouth since they've been in the division in
I mean,
3 attempts so
that
far.
just tells its own story, doesn't it? Really. I mean, I know it's one game, but that it just goes to show you part of the reason why we are where we are.
If you've got nothing to add, we'll move to Monday, Chris, which is Sheffield
Yeah,
Wednesday.
I've got to be honest, Nathan. I'm just the sheer thought of that performance and inevitability. It's just made me more livid off yesterday and going to Sheffield Wednesday on Monday. It's really bad because look, again, I don't think they've won a game in God knows how long at Hillsborough. The manager's off. The chairman can't even be bothered to pay the players, and yet Middlesbrough will probably still go, and then we'll just end up getting beat.
You just made a point which I didn't know about their home form.
I don't think they've won since January,
They
possibly
haven't
even before.
they haven't won a game at Hillsborough since New Year's Day. And they also haven't won a game currently since the 11th of March. So they haven't won a game in a month. They lost the Sheffield Derby, they lost to Hull, and they lost to Oxford, all at home.
They're not a good side. If I'm totally honest, Middlesbrough, if even if Coventry go and beat Hull to keep any any chance of anything being alive towards the last two games of the season, it is literally no room for error. And it's not just the same, because I think mathematically, if we don't go and win the next two games, it's done and dusted. Let's be honest, it's more or less done and dusted anyway. But as I say, maybe the title of the podcast, No Room for Error. But with this Middlesbrough squad, there's plenty of scope for error, and probably some comical ones that'll just tip me over the edge, and I'll end up just putting my head through me recording equipment next week when we record the podcast. Easter special.
Yeah, it's certainly do or die for the season. I think possibly we are already dead, but we have two games in the space of a handful of days that, look, it is very wishful thinking. Stranger things have happened, but there is a slight, and it is a very, very, very slim possibility that Boro could find themselves back in it at the end of next weekend. But I'm not holding out too much hope. I think we're at the end, Chris.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but we live in hope. So yes, we'll leave it there. We kind of got sidetracked and went off on a little tangent, but it's been more of a therapy session than anything. So if you're still watching at this point, then I hope it's served the same purpose as it has done for me and Nathan. I do hope everyone has a lovely Easter, eats plenty of chocolate, and Middlesbrough don't ruin it too much for you. Who knows? There might be some Easter magic. Stick the Easter bunny up top next week. And yeah, let's just hope that this podcast isn't in complete turmoil by the time we record next week. Because even though we've probably only got maximum 3 left, even if we don't make the playoffs, I don't think I can possibly face any. I'm at the end of my tether with this group of players. So please, for the love of God and for the love of this podcast, please, Middlesbrough, give us all something to cheer about over the Easter weekend. So yes, as always, please like and subscribe on YouTube. Please do rate and review on audio platforms. And that has been a therapeutic episode of the Boropolis podcast.